Have you ever noticed that the Bible is full of people being separated for reasons that seem quite strange today? Forget the idea that being alone is always punishment or loneliness. Today I'm going to show you that these separations were curious historical strategies that changed the course of entire nations. Often what we call emptiness is actually a space that God created for something new to happen. Imagine discovering the real reason why a specific bird was chosen, or why a diet changed a prisoner's body. These are details that make anyone look at the Bible with the eyes of an explorer. Get ready, because what archaeology and ancient history reveal about these moments is mind-blowing. We'll enter palaces, cross deserts, and understand the psychology behind decisions that seem crazy, but were actually genius. It's a light, informative, and to-the-point discussion for anyone who loves a good "did you know?" I cut out all the fluff so we can focus on what really matters, the knowledge that sets you apart. Stick with me until the end, because the last example about Jesus will change what you think about quality time. You'll see that being alone can be your greatest superpower if you know what to do. To get us started on the right foot, leave a like if you enjoy this style of genuine trivia. This lets YouTube know that you want to learn new things and not just hear the same old warnings. Now, let's dive into the first historical fact, which is, at the very least, curious and very strategic. Abraham and Lot didn't separate just because the shepherds were arguing over something trivial. They were resolving a major issue over grazing rights. Back then, whoever controlled the water controlled everything, and they made one of the first territorial division agreements in history. It was a masterstroke to prevent the flocks from dying of thirst in the desert heat. The coolest thing is that Abraham, being the older brother, gave Lot the chance to choose first, an incredibly noble gesture. Lot went to the fertile plains, which were constantly open to attacks and dangerous influences. Abraham, on the other hand, was left with the mountains, which were more difficult to manage, but served as a natural fortress. Archaeology shows that Abraham's tents were made of a material adapted to the climate, keeping his culture pure. This geographical separation served to protect his family's identity, while Lot got lost in the chaos of the cities. It was a lesson in planning. Abraham chose security over visual ease. It's curious how the ground you walk on says so much about your future, and Abraham knew this very well. He preferred strategic isolation so as not to dilute what he believed in amidst the confusion of his neighbors. The result was a lineage that lasted for millennia, while Lot's path was far more complicated and unstable. Did you know that cattle management was such a complex and serious business back then? If you found this geographical detail cool, comment below. Biblical geography. I find it fascinating how the map explains what the text sometimes doesn't directly tell us. When Joseph was taken to Egypt, he entered a world that was the Silicon Valley of antiquity. The name the Pharaoh gave him, Zaphanath-Paneah, has a curious meaning linked to being a savior or revealer of secrets. He was completely separated from his past to become a master of high-level management. Imagine a young shepherd having to learn hieroglyphs, one of the most difficult languages of all time. Joseph went from someone who cared for animals to someone who managed grain silos with advanced engineering. Egypt was a master at storing food, and Joseph took that technique to a level no one had ever known. There's a very curious visual detail. To enter the palace, Joseph had to shave off his beard and hair. This was a radical aesthetic departure, since the Hebrews highly valued beards, but the Egyptians focused on total hygiene. He literally changed his face to be able to save his family years later. Excavations suggest that Joseph lived in houses that blended Egyptian style with the comforts he already knew. He lived like a high-ranking official on the outside, but inwardly he kept his faith and customs well guarded. This double life is what allowed him to reach the top without losing his way. Jose proves that being separated can be the greatest intensive adaptation course someone can take in life. He didn't lose his essence. He simply gained new tools to master the environment he was placed in. It's the kind of story that shows that silent preparation always wins in the end. Moses spent 40 years in the palace as a prince but needed another 40 in the desert to become a survivor. This radical separation transformed a city man into a master of escape routes and hidden water sources. This time, alone, gave him the mental map to lead the exodus safely. The biological curiosity here is that the desert trains your ears to perceive sounds that no one else notices in the noise. This keen hearing is what allowed Moses to differentiate an ordinary sound from a supernatural voice in the middle of nowhere. He wasn't just tending sheep, he was being trained in total alertness. He married Zipporah, from a tribe that was expert at surviving in extreme conditions, which was a learning bonus. Without this practical isolation, Moses would hardly have known how to keep so many people alive in such a hostile and dry place. The desert was the logistics school that the Egyptian palace could never offer him. They say that burning bushes can be natural phenomena, but the fact that this one wasn't consumed is what struck Moses. Since he already knew everything about the nature of the desert, he knew that this was something out of the ordinary. The separation gave him the discerning eye to recognize what was divine and what was common. This detail changes everything. Moses wasn't wasting time. He was gaining elite skills that no other prince possessed. Sometimes, what we perceive as a setback is simply intensive training for what lies ahead. Have you ever felt like you were learning something useless that later saved your skin? The separation of Gideon's 300 is one of the most curious cases of military psychology you'll find in the Bible. Many people focus on the miracle, but the water test was a screening of readiness and alertness. Those who knelt lost their field of vision, while those who drank with their hands kept their eyes on the enemy. This tactical observation shows that God wanted soldiers with the best reflexes and focus in their environment. Since attacks at the time were a surprise, having men who weren't distracted even to drink water was the only way to survive. It was a selection based on who was truly ready for a real fight. Another crazy detail: the 300 didn't use swords at the beginning, but rather trumpets, clay pots, and hidden torches. It was total psychological warfare to make the enemy think that each trumpet sound meant an entire army was arriving. Separating those specific men ensured that the noise and light plan worked flawlessly. The ceramic vessels were perfect for making a dry, loud sound that echoed through the mountains at night. Imagine 300 vessels breaking simultaneously in absolute silence. The shock was enough to send the enemy fleeing. Gideon used this separation to create the first special operations group in biblical history. I find it incredible how a simple gesture reveals so much about who is focused and who is distracted in life. Are you the type who loses focus easily, or are you always keeping an eye on what's happening around you? Comment below. Always alert, if you would pass Gideon's test today. Elijah was sent to the brook Cherith and experienced one of the most curious stories of animal provision. God used ravens to bring him food, which is fascinating because these birds are famous for being intelligent and selfish. Science shows that ravens can plan for the future and even recognize human faces with ease. In the culture of that time, the raven was an unclean animal, so seeing Elijah being sustained by them was a complete breaking of the rules. God used the unlikely to keep the prophet alive while he was hidden and separated from everyone else. It's a curious fact about how nature can work in your favor when you're in the right place. The Cherith Creek was a perfect geographical hiding place, far from the main routes and difficult for soldiers to find. Elijah was in total isolation, but received deliveries of bread and meat twice a day without fail. The silence of the place was what he needed to shield his mind from what was to come. Recent studies show that crows can form bonds of friendship with those they live with, which makes Elias's routine very curious. Imagine his daily interaction with the birds in the midst of that absolute solitude by the stream. His separation was a laboratory of faith and biology that we rarely stop to analyze. The animal kingdom holds mysteries that the Bible uses to show that we are never truly helpless. If you found this tidbit about ravens too clever, you're not alone in your research. They are truly impressive creatures and much smarter than most people imagine. The argument between Paul and Barnabas is a historical fact that few people like to talk about, but it was extremely important. They had a heated debate about whether or not to take John Mark with them, and decided it was best for each to go their own way. Interestingly, this separation doubled the scope of their missions in half the planned time. While Barnabas traveled by sea to Cyprus, Paul went overland, focusing on the major Roman cities of influence. What seemed like the end of a friendship was, in fact, an optimization of routes and talents that worked perfectly. They managed to reach two completely different audiences at the same time thanks to this division. In the ancient world, travel was expensive and dangerous, so having two separate teams reduced the risk of losing everything in a robbery. Paul used his rights as a Roman citizen, while Barnabas used his influence with the local community to open doors. Together they were strong, but separately they were far more efficient in their expansion strategy. The most curious thing is that this separation helped John Mark mature away from Paul's constant pressure. Later, he ended up writing one of the Gospels, proving that the time apart was what he needed. Sometimes separation is necessary to give space for someone's talent to finally emerge and shine. Have you ever had to distance yourself from someone and then realized that it made you both grow much faster? The story of these two shows that not every goodbye is bad. Sometimes it's just life's way of giving you more territory. Learning to let go without holding a grudge is a sign that you've understood the game. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem in just 52 days, an engineering record that intrigues historians to this day. The curious trick was the separation by families. Each person repaired the section of the wall that was in front of their own house. This resulted in a level of care and speed that no construction contract could achieve. He had to carefully manage his time, refusing invitations to meetings that were simply a waste of time. Nehemiah knew that focus was his greatest weapon, and that any distraction could cost the safety of the entire people. He lived in total mental detachment to be able to deliver the project within the absurd deadline of 2 months. With walls over 2 meters thick, the logistics of materials had to be perfect to avoid wasting energy. He separated the personnel into those who guarded with swords and those who worked with shovels, maintaining a 24-hour guard. This crisis management model is still studied today in elite administration and productivity courses. The curious thing is that Nehemiah was a high-ranking official in the palace, trained in etiquette and royal security before going to the construction site. He used all this office experience to manage the fastest-growing construction site in classical antiquity. The separation from a life of luxury and hard labor was what saved the dignity of his nation. Imagine the level of organization required to coordinate so many families at once under the threat of imminent invasion. Nehemiah was a productivity genius who understood that focusing is the secret to overcoming any wall in life. If you want to be productive like that, you need to learn to say no to what doesn't matter. Daniel's dietary restriction in Babylon was, technically, the first recorded nutritional experiment we know of. He refused the king's heavy food and asked to eat only vegetables and drink water for 10 days to test the results. The scientific curiosity is that his mental clarity was 10 times greater than that of the other young men. The Babylonian diet was full of fat and alcohol, which is terrible for someone who needs to study astronomy and advanced mathematics. Daniel chose a diet rich in fiber and antioxidants, which kept his brain functioning at a much higher frequency. This separation of habits is what secured him the position of royal advisor. He lived in one of the greatest intellectual centers of the ancient world without being contaminated by the local religious culture. Daniel was a separate foreigner who mastered pagan science but maintained his personal principles intact in his daily life. His discipline was what made him different and far more trustworthy than the Babylonian sages. Daniel lived to be 90 years old, maintaining power through several different empires that overthrew one another. This shows that his unique lifestyle led to a longevity and lucidity that were extremely rare at that time. He proved that what you put inside determines how far you go on the outside. Have you ever noticed how your diet changes your mood and your drive to get things done? The Daniel test proves that our physical health fuels our intelligence and authority. It's curious how a choice of food can change the fate of a prisoner into a ruler. Finally, the most important question: why did Jesus, with so many people to heal, disappear to deserted places all the time? The archaeology of the region shows that these places were caves or hills with perfect acoustic silence for the mind to rest. Jesus used separation as a tool for mental health and energy recharging. Living surrounded by noise and constant emotional demands drains anyone, and Jesus knew he needed this isolation. He didn't run away from people. He distanced himself so he could return with much more power and calm to help them. His separation was the secret to that authority that impressed everyone in the cities. Being alone in the desert place was where he aligned his thoughts and made the most important decisions of his ministry. His example shows that pausing is not a waste of time, but a way to gain strength for the battles that truly matter. Biblical separation in the end is about connecting with what is vital and eternal. If this video helped you see the Bible in a lighter and more curious way, I have a special invitation for you. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring these historical facts that most people overlook. Comment below, "Jesus teaches me," if you also need some time to recharge today. Let's embark on this journey together.